Welcome back to Student Hub Live. Well, in this section, we're going to talk about assessment, calmly doing it well. It can be a cause of anxiety. Tala's just told us that she's got 2 TMAs due. Actually, quite a way away, Tala, because very often one will work on them quite close before the deadline. So I'm joined by Jess Hughes, who's from our Classical Studies department, and Rob Moore from the Business School. Rob, you're a tutor, so you're going to give us that perspective, and Jess, you're going to talk about it from, I guess, a chair or a academic point of view, from someone who devises a lot of these questions. So we've got 2 little different angles here to work on. For many students, especially students who may not have been in higher education ever or for a long time, or may have had bad experiences of education before, assessment can feel a little bit scary for some people. But it's the way we assess people's understanding, and there's loads and loads of it within any OU qualification. So what is the sort of key thing that you think students need to know about assessment?
I'm sure I'm going to say this more than once in this session, but for me the most important thing is answering the question. Yes. So it sounds really obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people write fabulous essays, but on a question that isn't quite the same as the one in the assignment book. So I would say, every single TMA that you do, just sit down, have a good look at the question, take your time over it, circle, underline key phrases, and then just, make sure as you're writing it, keep going back. Have I answered the question? And you can even put in keywords or refer back to the wording of the question during your assignment, so that the person who's marking it knows that you are answering it and you are on track. So, and at the end, read back everything and just say, have I answered the question? So that is probably my top piece of advice.
But it is so important because, as you say, I've marked some beautiful pieces of work but are not related to the question, and it's really hard to give marks because I guess when we sort of unpick the whole nature of assessment, it's about this notion that we send students module materials and then check their understanding of those materials very often in an undergraduate qualification. So if they know heaps about a subject or they've got amazing insights, it doesn't really matter because we're assessing something very specific.
Yes, that's it. Assignments have got more than one purpose. And as you say, testing the understanding of the module materials is one of them, but it's also about developing those key skills of analysing, of constructing an argument, of writing an essay. And no module team is ever going to sit down and write a question which is, tell us all you know about X subject, Elizabeth I or Cleopatra or whatever. It will always be a more targeted question that tests not only your understanding and your knowledge of the materials, but also your skills in addressing that very specific theme.
Yeah, no, it's important. Rob, what's your perspective from a tutor?
So a lot of that, I absolutely, totally agree with what you've said. Reading the question is the most important thing. The worst thing I ever write as a tutor in my feedback is, that is a really good answer, but you haven't told me what I needed to give you the marks. And I see some brilliant answers, but I can't give marks for them.
Yeah.
The purpose of assessment, obviously, to check that you, basically, have you studied the material? Have you got involved with it? Have you understood it? But realising we're not there trying to catch you out. Assessment is not there to try and trip you up, and we're not trying to give you the lowest mark possible. We're trying to help you, and specifically when you start your first course, we know people have been out of education for a while. They might not have studied at higher education, so we're expecting to help you to get those skills. As you go through the different levels, we expect you to have different skills, and we will mark them differently at the different levels. But in your first course, we just want to help you to get those good skills, the referencing, the way of framing the argument, the way of putting your point forward. And my favourite word is fluff. Not putting too much fluff in, because students put a lot of words and a lot of phrases that don't actually mean anything. Yeah. So a lot of my feedback at level 1 in the first courses is about how to get to the point and answer the question that you've been asked. So I suppose that's my first one. Know that we're there to help you. We're not there to trip you up. Assessment is to help you to get better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're not asking trick questions in a sense. We're genuinely trying to sense check students' understanding, and we try and do this in the most imaginative ways possible. I mean, there are key things there, like reading the question. There's also assessment guidance for students as well, so we'll give them notes on what we're expecting. And there's another thing that's really, really important is the learning outcomes, and this sort of taps into, I think, just what you were talking about skills that we're expecting students to develop. But so many students don't look at those learning outcomes because they can look a bit boring and dry, but they're really important.
They're really, really important. And really, in a nutshell, learning outcomes are everything that you're expected to know and be able to do at the end of a module. And they're generally grouped into different areas. So there might be knowledge and understanding or cognitive skills, but you'll be able to find those in the assessment handbook. And it's really worth, isn't it, going and having a look at those. Even when you've written your assignment and you're at that final stage of checking it over, you know, how is this addressing the learning outcomes? And what's my tutor going to think, how well I've done of this? So we were talking about this earlier, weren't we? And that came up with you as well as something you thought was really important.
Yeah, absolutely, because students often say, how are you going to mark? And as tutors, we can't give you our marking guidelines. We can't give you what we're used to marking. However, here's a secret, our marking guidelines are variations of the learning outcomes. Yeah. That's what we're looking for. So if you want to know what the tutor's looking for, at the start of every TMA, tutor marked assignment, if you've not done one yet, start of every assignment, there is a list of the learning outcomes we are looking for in that assignment. And those will be our marking guidelines. It won't have the marks there, but if you want to know that you've covered everything, read through them. Have I applied this theory? Have I shown this piece of understanding? And it's all set out for you. We don't mark you on anything we haven't asked you to do. So it's not hidden, it's very clear. You just need to know where to look, really.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's all about unpacking that question. We asked people at home what they're most dreading about assessments. Nobody says, will it be boring? So I think they all know that we're imaginative enough to make it interesting. But what people are most worried about is meeting the deadline. So that's the majority of people's minds. And then the second most popular answer is, I've not studied for years and a lack of confidence. So let's tackle this whole thing then about the deadlines, because tutor-marked assignments are very often a core staple of a module. So often they'll be, depending on how many credits you've got, 3 or 4 or maybe 6 pieces of assessed work that happen throughout the year. And those will be at sort of fairly regular intervals. And if you're doing 2 modules like Tala, you may have them happening at similar sorts of times. So meeting the deadlines is important.
Yeah. Yes, and I think the very first thing really you should do when you open up your module website, your assessment handbook, is get a pen in your diary and just mark out exactly when, first of all, when the deadlines are, but also then build in time before each deadline. It sounds obvious, but unless you're very, very organised, it can be quite easy to feel stressed about it and get in a bit of a last-minute panic. So I think organisation is absolutely key, and just knowing exactly when those deadlines are. And I think linked to that also this idea of looking at how much each assignment's weighted, because you might find you've got 6 assignments on your module, but one of them's only worth 5% or something. So maybe that isn't the place to put all of your energy. So do have a look at that and think about that when you're judging how much time it's going to take you to meet those TMA deadlines.
Because some of the things we've said today are that you all start at the same time and you end at the same time. And I guess it's what happens in the middle that's the variable. But as you say, Jess, you know, if you've got the majority of the sort of marks for that year's worth of study right at the end, it's better to sort of plan those out and not try and get extensions or, you know, give yourself enough breathing space in between those pieces of work.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure if students realise that we have a limit on the number of extensions we can actually give. So we can only give 2 long extensions in any module, and you can't have an extension on the last one.
No.
The problem with extensions is they tend to snowball. So if you have one on TMA 1, you probably have one on TMA 2, and then it can snowball. So you have to be very careful. Your tutor is there to help, and we give all sorts of advice that's appropriate. So always ask your tutor is the best piece of advice. I talk to a lot of students either before or after the assignment, and I say the same things whether I talk to them before or after. The only difference is if I talk to them before, the marks are higher. But I say the same things. This is what I want from you, or this is what you didn't put in, this is what you should have put in.
Assuming they listen to you, Rob.
Well, I think I can quite honestly say that all of my students that get the higher marks are the ones that bother me. They're not bothering me, but they're the ones who call me and check things. And I'd much rather have a 20-minute conversation before an assignment than a 30-minute conversation explaining why they got low marks. And I think students are sometimes scared to ask for clarification. The other thing is we're quite open about what we want. All tutors will give you information on what you should be putting in your assignment. Read it or listen to it, because if you don't, it's only you that's missing out. And it's very obvious when you're a tutor, when a student has done an assignment and they've not read the guidance or they haven't listened to the advice. and you can just see that they haven't followed what they should be doing.
It's tricky though, I think, especially when you're met with so much interesting content. Because sometimes you're in a really brilliant chapter and then you get a piece of work that says, describe so-and-so's argument and explain why it's relevant to such and such. And you think, yeah, but actually, this is really interesting and I'd really like to write about that. And maybe if I include 3 other things and I'm going to go to the library and I'm going to find some other stuff about it. And it's super exciting. I'm really into it. And I've also known from my own experience this stuff. So you can write these brilliant pieces of work really easily. But actually then, I guess when you're marking something, what you're saying, Rob, is that you haven't described something in enough words that have been allocated in the guidance. So there's a limited amount of marks, I guess, you could get just by default because you've gone into other detail.
And yet quite often we get to see that focus is lost. So students will either put too many things in so that each item has only got a few lines, and they don't give us the depth that we want, or they go off on their hobby horse or their thing they're really interested in and they don't focus on the specific question. And this all comes back to double checking the point. A lot of level 1 TMAs have specific tutorials to make sure you've got the point. We want you to succeed. We would be absolutely over the moon if everybody got a distinction. You know, it's not the case we have to fail students. You know, we want everybody to succeed, and that's where the advice comes. But I think the main thing is not to leave it to the last minute. Students that really panic are the ones that don't read the assignment till the end. I think a key piece of advice I would give is when you start a block or a unit, read the TMA first, and then you can highlight the key things as you go through. If you get to the end of the block and then you read the TMA, you will have to go back and figure out which bits are relevant. Whereas if you've read the assignment first, and this isn't saying only study the bits for the assignment, but if you've read the assignment first, you can tick it off and you can flag up, you can mark the bits that are relevant so that you can find them easy at the end. And it's back to your planning. Plan when it's due, plan your reading, and don't get caught out. I mean, it's students that sometimes come to me and say, oh, sorry it's late, but I hadn't realised it was due today. And I get at least 2 or 3 students every year that are surprised by the assignment date, but they're published from day 1. So again, the plan is a great idea. Stick it in your calendar, stick it in your diary, make a plan for when you're going to answer it.
So Jess, Rob's been talking about the guidance, and I wonder if we might take an example, because we've got one to show students about the importance of reading the assessment notes and things. So we've got one here because if students haven't found it on their assessment tab, and we've got some slides that will show a TMA from A111.
Yes, this is, I know that there are some students watching who are taking A111 or A111 as we affectionately call it, because I popped into the chat box earlier and was really pleased to see some people taking that and, you know, seem to be enjoying it or looking forward to it. So this is Discovering the Arts and Humanities, and I just picked out an example of some guidance just to really show what it looks like, what you can expect on an Arts and Humanities module.
Brilliant. But every student will have something similar. It will all give some sort of guidance, some sort of learning outcomes. It will all be listed on the module website, even if they have an assessment guide. So all of the TMAs, the tutor marked assignments, will be listed there. Should we take a look and see what happens for TMA 1?
Sure.
So, Jess, what can you say about this slide here?
Well, without going into too many specifics, also because it's, spoiler alert, I don't want to spoil anybody's fun and curiosity, but I just picked out, there are bits highlighted in bold, and often, this is something that the module team will do if there are things that are really, really important. So, you've got the deadline at the top. Don't worry, everyone, it hasn't passed. This is like from the October presentation, but, so the deadline's highlighted. The word count right down at the bottom. This is really, really crucial as well. Don't write too much, don't write too little. There's always a tiny bit of leeway, and the rules and regulations about that are listed in the assessment booklet. But try and just stick as closely as possible as you can to that word limit. And then I think just before you've got, I don't know if you can see Cleopatra and Mary and Elizabeth I. These are just options of questions that you can answer, and above that it says, you know, choose 2 of those. So that's the kind of rubric that is so important, because if you accidentally did just 1 or you did 3, you know, that's why we've put the 2 in bold, because you absolutely have to do 2. And in a way, that's one of the worst mistakes that I think you could make with this assignment, is, you know, not following the rubric of the question. So,
but so many students met with things like that. They'll say to me, "Can I do 3?"
Yeah.
Or, you know, but you know, there's this important point here about this assignment is giving people an indication of the breadth and depth that they should go into. So you've got the word count and you've got the number of things. So I guess by default, if you've got 600 words in this case and 2 things to talk about, you should really be talking about those 2 things in about 300 words each, shouldn't you?
Yes, I think, if I remember rightly, it's 600 words each, but that the next page of the assessment guidance will outline that really clearly. And, you know, the module team, we work so hard in trying to make all this guidance as clear and as unambiguous as possible, and just putting ourselves into a student's position and thinking, how, you know, can I misunderstand this in any way? And the assessment guidelines, they go through numerous drafts where we're all reading it and seeing, you know, is this as clear as it possibly can be? But if you have any doubts whatsoever, ask your tutor.
So there's general guidance then that students can see, and there are bullet points here as well where you'll tell the students exactly what to expect. And here there are 4 bullet points, and again you refer the students to the assessment guide where they can find out more information, but here's some clearly stated guidance as well.
Yes, and I think that really, you know, the link to the assessment guide is probably the most important element here, because that is going to be where you can go back continuously, access from there's an assessment tab at the top where you can go and access that, and any questions that you have about things like word limits and deadlines and how to get an extension and how to submit, you know, how to submit a dummy TMA are going to be linked in that assessment guide. So that's the place to go to answer all of your queries, really, as well as your tutor, and also your student support team as well. They're another great source of information.
Brilliant. And then very often you have a checklist at the end where you'll tell students, make sure you've done this, this and this, because sometimes it can be very easy to forget.
Yes, absolutely. And in this instance, you'll see like the top of the checklist is all about, you know, have you answered the question? That's our favourite question. And then other things are just, you know, ways of making your answer stronger. So whether it's putting subheadings into the different parts of your answer or remembering to include the word count, these are just things, you know, none of these are going to be a deal breaker, unlike breaking the rubric or not answering the question, but they are going to make it much stronger. And if you don't do them, there are going to be things that your tutor will feed back on. And I mean, that is another really important thing to discuss in a session like this, is the tutor feedback, you know, how important that is, because we've spoken about chatting to tutors beforehand, but this chat that you have afterwards, the TMA isn't a self-standing assignment, it's part of a longer learning strategy that goes all the way through the module and beyond, all the way through your learning journey. And I think the tutor feedback is just so important. And so that would be like my second point, second major point to emphasise is, you know, read the question, read the feedback. Don't just go for the mark that you get afterwards, but see what your tutor has to say about how you can improve for next time.
Because we were talking before about students who get ahead and submit 2 assignments before the module's even started. And one of my colleagues made a really good point, saying actually, if you've submitted 2 assignments, you haven't gone from the feedback from the first assignment, you haven't used that to then inform your learning for the second one. So it's effectively pointless, because this whole idea is trying to develop and grow your skills.
And quite often, I get a phone call from a student saying, "Oh, can we have a chat about the mark? Because it wasn't very good." And I say, "Yes." What questions have you got from the feedback? "Oh, I haven't read it yet." So they want to have a chat, but they don't want to read the feedback. So my answer is always the same. Yeah, very happy to have a chat, but read the feedback first so that we're focusing on the things that I've said rather than just general feedback. And actually, some of the most difficult conversations I have are with the students who get 90 plus, where they want to know, how do I get the 100? And so it's not just a case of talking to your tutor if you've got a really poor mark. Actually, some of the more I have to justify giving somebody 94. I find that more difficult than justifying giving somebody 40. Because 40, it's obvious where they've gone wrong. If they're given 94. But don't feel guilty if you want to know where to get the extra 6 marks. Put your tutor under some pressure. They can, you know, they can tell you where the extra bits are. So we don't want you to think that tutors are only there if you've done a bad job. If you've done a really good job but still want to improve. And because we do like students that really want to excel and do the best they possibly can.
Brilliant.
If I can pick up on the dummy TMA that Jessica mentioned earlier. When you first join, actually for every course, we have a special TMA that you can submit. It's TMA 00. We call it the dummy. And if you haven't submitted with the Open University before, it's a way of submitting a file for your tutor to see, to feedback on and return. And it just gives you that little bit of confidence that the system's working. So this is how I submit a TMA, this is how it comes back, this is what it looks like.
And to check you can see the feedback, because sometimes students can't see it and they don't know it's there. But until you say, I've written some comments on here, please check you can see them, they might not know and might miss out on all that.
I'm not sure if you talked about it today, but the fact that we now have Office 365 for all students is a great tool, because when I was studying, there used to be all sorts of different systems you would use and they weren't compatible. But now there's no reason at all for them not to be compatible.
Michelle's been super excited about all of the various things students can get.
Oh, I am very excited. I'm very excited because we've got Shirley, who overcame her hubby's heart attack, and Beverly, who has been 30 years out of study. They're both back studying and absolutely loving it. And Sharon left school in 1986 and she's loving being a student as well, which is great to hear. And Tala and Shirley said that they learn a lot from the feedback and that they can see their marks improving. Victoria was quite surprised that some students weren't aware or would even ask about what the feedback is. And so she said she loves the feedback. So that's great with the students on board. And the final point is Kate uses a bullet journal and has given a link for students to click in to see what that's about. She has some challenges that she faces with studying, and that helps her keep on top of it. So people have been referring to the study planner on Student Home, trying to get ahead with the study planner. But I'm with Karen on that. If you get too far ahead, you actually miss out on some of the key information that might be helpful for your TMA. Remember, there's only one deadline, and that's the one that you need to submit it. So maybe write early, but think about how you can re-edit and put more points in as you go through.
Did you talk earlier about the resubmissions?
No.
So I'm not sure if students are aware you can do this. So for some very good reasons, students submit early. So if they've got something coming up, it could be, I've had all of these, very long holidays, weddings, babies, the whole thing. So sometimes students want to get a few weeks ahead just so that they've got a comfort blanket for whatever's happening. But you are allowed to submit up to 5 times, I think it is, up to the cut-off date. So if you submit early, then you get some extra insight, or you decide there's something you want to add, you can then change it and submit it again. So you can resubmit 4 times up to the cut-off date.
But it's always good to tell your tutor in case they are trying to download them early and mark them, which they're entitled to do, aren't they, if you send something in early?
Yeah, you don't want a grumpy tutor marking your assignment because it's the 3rd submission, they've already marked it twice.
No.
You will have a grumpy tutor. So,
you certainly will.
So let them know if you're thinking of it, and then they won't mark it until the deadline.
Brilliant. Now, we're out of time on this, but I just wanted to end by emphasising one point, Jess, which is this whole idea that feedback, unfortunately, does never end if you have an academic career. Can you just very briefly fill students in on how this is still an ongoing process for many of us?
Oh, my goodness. Well, even writing these module materials, it's a process for us, the authors, of getting constant feedback. It's a constant learning process. So we will submit drafts of our module materials. We'll get comments back on them. We'll be told to change things. No, that's all wrong. You could say this better. So it's not something that ends when you stop being a student. If you want to go into an academic career or many, many other careers, feedback is going to be so important. It's one of these transferable skills. Definitely. And, you know, submitting journal articles as part of our research portfolios, we're always getting referee reports, sometimes with quite harsh feedback. So it's good to get used not only to incorporating feedback, but also to being resilient to it as well, and just taking it in good spirit and seeing it as a learning opportunity.
Because very often it's about making things better, and I guess that point that we're constantly making things better, and that it happens no matter what sorts of work we're doing. It's not just being a student that this involves. So the sooner you can get your head around it, I guess the better, even though it still hurts every single time.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for doing that. That's an absolute fantastic chairs and tutors perspective on various aspects of assignment. I hope that you've enjoyed that at home. Our next session after this video is Study Like an Athlete. So that's going to be really, really good. Again, some brilliant tips. Even if you're not an athlete, which many of you won't be, we've got some really interesting ideas from sport and fitness that you can employ in your everyday study skills. And we're going to show you a campus tour about learning together. So a very quick video with Dan Weinbrunn, and then we'll be back for that next session. See you soon.